My name is Olivia. I turned 84 the night everything finally broke. It was supposed to be a beautiful evening. I had planned it carefully, too carefully maybe. The dining room was glowing in warm light, the long oak table dressed in linen I had saved for special occasions. Funny how we wait for the right moment to use the things we love, as if life sends invitations in advance. I had invited a small circle, neighbors, two old friends from my volunteer days, and of course, my son Daniel and his wife, Claire. I told myself this would be a peaceful night, a meaningful one. Deep down, I think I already knew better. Daniel arrived late. He always did. The front door opened with more force than necessary, and I heard his uneven footsteps before I saw him. That slight sway in his walk, subtle to strangers, obvious to me, told me he'd already been drinking. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, leaning in just enough to brush my cheek. His breath carried that sharp scent I had learned not to comment on. Claire followed behind him, her eyes moving quickly around the room, not admiring, not appreciating, calculating. She had a way of looking at things as if they already belonged to her. I smiled anyway. I always smiled. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Laughter floated across the table. Stories were shared. Glasses clinked. For a while, I let myself believe this was real, that maybe tonight would be different. But Daniel grew restless. I watched him refill his glass again and again, his patience thinning with every sip. Claire leaned toward me at one point and said, almost casually, "This house must be worth a fortune now." I nodded politely, though something inside me tightened. When it came time for the cake, I stood up slowly, steadying myself on the table. Everyone quieted, ready for the usual birthday ritual. That's when Daniel pushed his chair back. The sound cut through the room. He stood, raising his glass with a crooked smile that I had come to recognize over the years. Not joy, not pride, something sharper. "A toast," he said loudly. The room fell silent. "To my mother," he continued, his voice dripping with mock warmth, "who is still holding on to everything like she plans to live forever." A few uncomfortable chuckles flickered and died. He didn't stop. "Seriously," he went on, now fully leaning into it, "how long are you going to keep everything locked up? You've got more money than you could ever spend, and I'm your only son." I felt something inside my chest drop, like an elevator with broken cables. "Daniel," someone murmured, but he ignored it. "It's just selfish at this point," he added, shrugging as if stating a simple fact. "What are you even saving it for?" Claire laughed softly beside him. Actually laughed. That sound stayed with me longer than his words. I stood there, holding the cake knife, suddenly unsure of what to do with my hands, my face, my entire existence. The room blurred at the edges. Conversations stopped completely now. No one knew where to look. And in that moment, something became painfully clear. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was an obstacle. I set the knife down carefully. I don't even remember deciding to do it. My body just moved. "I need a moment," I said quietly. No one stopped me. I walked into the kitchen, each step feeling strangely distant, like I was watching someone else move through my house. My own home. Through the window above the sink, I saw Ethan. He was in the garden as usual, adjusting something near the flower beds, moving with that quiet focus he always had. He looked up, noticed me, and gave a small wave. Then his expression changed. Concern. Genuine, immediate concern. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't expect anything. Yet somehow he noticed everything. And standing there, with my son humiliating me in the next room, it hit me. The person who treated me with the most respect in my life wasn't family. It was the man I paid to take care of my garden. I pressed my hand against the counter, steadying myself as the realization settled in. 15 years. Ethan had been working here for 15 years. He remembered how I liked my tea. He fixed things before I even noticed they were broken. He asked how I was, not out of obligation, but because he actually cared. Daniel, on the other hand, hadn't called me once when I was sick last winter. Not once. When I returned to the dining room, people were already preparing to leave. Their faces carried that awkward mix of sympathy and discomfort. No one wanted to stay after something like that. Daniel was back in his chair, pouring himself more wine as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just been reduced to a number in front of everyone I knew. I watched my guests leave one by one, offering quiet hugs and apologies they didn't know me. And as the door closed behind the last of them, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, sharp, undeniable. But beneath it, something else was forming. Something colder. Something clearer. That night, I sat alone in my study, surrounded by memories, photographs, letters, pieces of a life I had built with care and sacrifice. And I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. When did my son stop seeing me as a person? Or maybe when did I start allowing it? I thought back, tracing the years like cracks in glass. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. But that night, my birthday, that was the moment I stopped pretending it wasn't real. And for the first time in a very long time, I began to think about what I wanted. Not what I owed. Not what was expected. What I wanted. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the same chair until morning, watching the darkness slowly give way to a pale, indifferent light. There's something about silence after a storm, not outside, but inside you, that feels almost louder than the noise itself. My house had never felt so unfamiliar. Every room carried echoes of a life I thought I understood, and yet now, everything felt slightly distorted, like I had been looking at it through the wrong lens for years. I pulled out an old photo album just before dawn. I hadn't opened it in a long time. Maybe because I was afraid of what I would find, or worse, what I wouldn't. The first pages were filled with Daniel as a child, a small boy with bright eyes and a crooked smile, holding onto my hand like I was his entire world. I traced one picture with my fingers. He couldn't have been older than 6, standing in the backyard with dirt on his cheeks, proudly showing me a flower he had planted himself. "For you, Mom," he had said that day. I remembered it clearly. Back then, love had been simple. Or maybe I just believed it was. I kept turning the pages. Birthdays, school events, awkward teenage years. There were signs, of course, little moments I had dismissed at the time. The way he would throw tantrums when he didn't get what he wanted, the way apologies came quickly but without depth. I used to call it growing pains. Now I wondered if I had simply been ignoring something more permanent. The real shift came after my husband died. I remember that day more clearly than I remember yesterday. The house was full of people offering condolences, their voices blending into a dull hum. I could barely stand, barely think, barely breathe, and Daniel pulled me aside in the middle of it all and asked about the insurance money. Not gently, not later, right there, while grief was still raw and unbearable. At the time, I told myself he didn't know how to process loss, that people reacted differently, that he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But he did. That was the first moment, the one I should have paid attention to. After that, things changed slowly but steadily. His visits became less about spending time together and more about checking in, which always somehow led to conversations about money. There was always a reason. A business idea that just needed a little support, a temporary setback, an opportunity that couldn't be missed. And every time I helped, I told myself that's what mothers do. We support. We give. We sacrifice. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't helping him. I was teaching him. Teaching him that I would always say yes. Teaching him that love meant access. Teaching him that I had no boundaries. And Daniel learned that lesson perfectly. Claire only made it worse. She entered his life like a quiet strategist, never openly rude, never directly demanding, but always guiding him in the same direction. I could see it in the way she spoke, the way she framed things. "We're struggling a bit right now," she would say with a soft smile, or "it would mean so much if we had a little help." It was never aggressive. It didn't have to be. By then, they both knew exactly how I would respond. There were moments when I hesitated. I remember one in particular. Daniel wanted me to help him buy a house he clearly couldn't afford. The numbers didn't make sense. The risk was obvious. And for the first time, I said no. Not angrily, not firmly, just uncertainly. And the reaction was immediate. Coldness. Distance. Days of silence followed by accusations. You don't trust me. You don't care about my future. After everything I've been through, I ended up giving in. Of course I did. Because the truth is I was afraid. Not of losing money. Of losing him. But somewhere along the way, without realizing it, I had already lost him. I just kept funding the illusion that he was still there. As the morning light filled the room, I closed the album and leaned back in my chair. My hands were steady now. That surprised me. I had expected to feel broken after everything that happened, but instead, I felt something else. Clarity. Painful, undeniable clarity. And then, almost instinctively, I thought of Ethan. He came into my life quietly, without significance at first. Just someone hired to take care of the garden after I couldn't manage it alone anymore. I remember expecting him to be like the others, efficient, polite, distant. But he wasn't. He noticed things. Small things. The kind that most people overlook because they don't bring any benefit. He remembered that I liked white roses instead of red. So one spring, without asking, he replaced a section of the garden just to make it more me, as he put it. When I slipped on the steps during winter, he didn't just help me up. He returned the next day with materials and fixed the entire entrance so it wouldn't happen again. I tried to pay him extra. He refused. Said it wasn't part of the job. Said it was just the right thing to do. The right thing. I couldn't remember the last time Daniel had done something simply because it was right. There was one moment that stood out more than the rest. Last winter, I had the flu. It was worse than I expected. I could barely get out of bed for days. I called Daniel. No answer. I left messages. No response. I told myself he was busy, that he'd call back. He didn't. Ethan showed up instead. Every morning, without being asked. He brought groceries, made sure I was eating, checked that I had taken my medicine. When I finally recovered, I tried to thank him, to compensate him somehow. He just smiled and said, "You don't owe me anything." That sentence stayed with me, because for years, I had felt like I owed everything to someone who had never once said that to me. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. The garden looked peaceful, untouched by everything that had happened inside the house. Ethan was already there, working quietly as always. He didn't know yet what had changed, but I did. For the first time in years, I stopped asking myself what Daniel needed, and started asking myself a different question. What do I deserve? The answer wasn't complicated. Respect, kindness, dignity. Things I had been giving away for free to the wrong person. I turned away from the window and reached for my phone. My fingers didn't hesitate this time. There was only one call I needed to make. The moment I picked up the phone, I knew there was no turning back. Some decisions don't feel dramatic on the outside. No thunder, no music, no visible shift in the world. But inside, something locks into place so firmly that you realize you've crossed a line you can never uncross. My hand didn't tremble as I dialed. That surprised me. For years, I had hesitated over much smaller choices, over things that barely mattered. But this felt different. This felt like truth. "Good morning, Olivia," Mr. Carter said when he answered. His voice was calm, measured, familiar. He had been handling my legal affairs for decades, first alongside his father, and then on his own. He knew my history, my family, my patterns, perhaps better than I did. "What can I do for you today?" "I need to change my will," I said. There was a brief pause. Not shock, not confusion, just the kind of silence that comes from someone who understands the weight of those words. "Of course," he replied. "Would you like to come in, or shall I arrange a visit to your home?" "I'll come to you," I said. "Today." An hour later, I was sitting in his office, The same office I had visited countless times before for routine matters. But nothing about this felt routine. The leather chair, the polished desk, the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall, it all felt sharper, more present, as if my senses had finally woken up after years of sleep. Mr. Carter studied me carefully, his eyes kind but observant. "You sound certain," he said. "I am." He nodded slowly. "Then tell me what you'd like to change." I didn't hesitate. "I want to leave everything to Ethan." For the first time, he leaned back slightly, processing. "Not judging, just recalibrating." "That is a significant revision," he said carefully. "Your current will names your son as primary beneficiary." "I know. And you're sure this isn't a decision made in anger?" "No," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "It's a decision made after years of ignoring what was right in front of me." I told him everything, not just about the birthday dinner, though that had been the breaking point. I told him about the years of subtle manipulation, the financial demands, the emotional distance. I told him about the phone calls that were never returned, the visits that always came with expectations, the way my worth had slowly been reduced to numbers in an account. And then I told him about Ethan, how he had shown up day after day, year after year, with consistency, respect, and quiet care. How he had never once asked for more than what he had earned. How he had treated me, not as a resource, not as an obligation, but as a person. When I finished, the room was silent again. Mr. Carter folded his hands on the desk. "Olivia," he said gently, "this is your decision to make. Legally, you have every right to distribute your estate however you choose. But I do need to advise you on potential consequences. Your son may contest the will." I expected that. "In that case," he continued, "it would be wise to leave him a minimal inheritance. Not enough to reward his behavior, but enough to demonstrate that he wasn't forgotten. That way, it becomes much harder to argue that you were acting irrationally or under undue influence." I nodded. "How much?" "Something symbolic. Enough to show intent." I thought for a moment, not about the amount, but about what it represented. 10,000, I said finally. "And my late husband's watch." Mr. Carter made a note. "Very well." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything in detail. Assets, accounts, property, legal protections. It was meticulous work, but I didn't feel overwhelmed. If anything, I felt lighter with every page we completed, like I was untangling something that had been knotted inside me for years. When it came time to sign, I paused for just a second, not out of doubt, out of recognition. This was the moment my life truly changed. I signed my name, and just like that, it was done. On the way home, I expected to feel something dramatic, fear, guilt, uncertainty. But none of those came. Instead, there was a quiet, steady sense of relief. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The kind that settles in slowly, like a long-held breath finally released. But peace, I would soon learn, doesn't arrive without resistance. That evening, my phone rang. "Daniel." I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hello." "Mom," he said, his voice tight, controlled in a way that immediately told me he was angry. "We need to talk." There it was again. Not "how are you?" Not "are you okay?" Just need. "I don't think that's necessary," I replied calmly. "It is," he snapped. "I'm coming over." "I'd prefer if you didn't." "That's not your decision." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the phone still in my hand. Something about his tone unsettled me, not because it was new, but because it wasn't. I had just never allowed myself to hear it clearly before. This time I did. And this time I didn't ignore it. Instead of waiting alone, I made another call. Ethan answered on the second ring. "Olivia? Everything all right?" His voice carried immediate concern.
No hesitación. No calculación.
"I was wondering if you could come by this evening," I said. "I may have difficult company." "I'll be there," he said without a second thought. No questions. No conditions. Just presence. He arrived 15 minutes later, right as Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. I saw it through the window. The sharp stop, the door opening too fast, the tension in his movements. Claire was with him, of course. They didn't knock properly. Daniel pushed the door open like it belonged to him. His eyes immediately landed on Ethan. "What is he doing here?" he demanded. "Ethan is a guest," I said evenly. "Just like you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Send him away. This is family business."
No.
The word came out before I even had time to think about it. Simple.
Clear.
Final. For a moment, Daniel just stared at me, as if trying to process what he had heard. In all his life, I had never refused him like that. Not directly. Not without explanation. Not without softening it. Claire stepped forward, her expression carefully composed. "Olivia," she said gently, "we're just worried about you. The other night, you seemed very upset over what was clearly just a joke." A joke. I almost smiled. Daniel crossed his arms. "Honestly, Mom, this behavior isn't normal. You're isolating yourself, making strange decisions, surrounding yourself with," he glanced at Ethan, "people who shouldn't be involved in family matters." There it was.
The shift.
Not concern.
Control.
"I think," Daniel continued, his voice lowering, "we may need to consider whether you're still capable of managing things on your own." The words hung in the air. For years, that kind of statement would have terrified me.
But now
Now it only confirmed everything. I looked at him, not as my son, not as someone I needed to protect, but as he truly was. And for the first time, I felt no confusion. Only clarity. "You should leave," I said quietly. "We're not finished," he snapped. "Yes," I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "We are." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Not for me, because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. 3 days passed in a strange kind of quiet. Not peaceful, just suspended, like the air before something breaks. I knew Daniel wouldn't let it go. He never had. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for his reaction with fear. I was waiting with clarity. That alone changed everything. On the third morning, I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea when the front door slammed open so violently that the sound echoed through the entire house. I didn't even turn my head right away. I knew who it was. "Have you lost your mind?" Daniel's voice filled the room before he did. When he finally appeared in the doorway, his face was flushed, his hands shaking, not from sadness, not from shock, from rage. I took a slow sip of tea before answering. "Good morning, Daniel." "Don't do that," he snapped, throwing a stack of papers onto the table. "Don't pretend this is normal." I glanced down. I didn't need to read them to know what they were. My new will. He must have found a way to get it. Money has a way of loosening other people's loyalty. "You left everything to him?" he said, his voice rising with every word. "To your gardener? $5 million? Are you insane?" "My mind has never been clearer," I replied calmly. That only made him angrier. "This is a joke," he said, pacing like a caged animal. "It has to be. I'm your son. That money is mine." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't."
he stopped pacing.
"What did you say?" "It's mine," I repeated. "And I've decided what to do with it." For a moment, he just stared at me, as if trying to force reality to rearrange itself into something more convenient. "You can't do this," he said finally, but now there was something else in his voice, something underneath the anger. Desperation. "We've made plans," he continued. "Claire and I, we've built our future around that money." I tilted my head slightly. "Around my death, you mean?" The silence that followed was sharp. He looked away first. That told me everything. Claire appeared behind him then, stepping into the kitchen with that same carefully controlled expression she always wore when things started slipping out of her control. "Olivia," she said softly, "you're not thinking clearly. This kind of decision, it's impulsive, emotional. It's not like you." "No," I said. It's exactly like me. She blinked, thrown off for just a second. Daniel leaned forward, placing both hands on the table, his face close to mine now. You're going to fix this, he said quietly. You're going to call your lawyer and change it back. Or what? I asked. The question landed heavier than I expected. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then his expression shifted. Not softer, colder. Or we'll have to take other steps, he said. There it was. No more pretending. What kind of steps? I asked calmly. He exhaled slowly, as if deciding how much to reveal. We've already spoken to someone, he said. A specialist. About your recent behavior. I felt it then, not fear, but something sharper. Recognition. You're going to try to declare me incompetent, I said. Claire didn't even try to deny it. We're worried about you, she said. These sudden decisions, the emotional instability, the influence of outsiders. Outsiders? I repeated, almost amused. Daniel straightened. That man has no place in this family. That man, I said slowly, has shown me more respect in 15 years than you have in your entire life. His jaw tightened. This isn't about respect. This is about manipulation.
He's using you.
I actually laughed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to break the illusion. No, I said. That's what you've been doing. The room went still. Daniel's eyes darkened. Be very careful with what you say. No, I replied, standing up now, meeting him at eye level for the first time in years. You should have been careful. Years ago. Something changed in that moment. Not in him. In me. The fear was gone. Completely gone. You should leave, I said. We're not going anywhere, he replied. Yes, I said, my voice steady, unwavering. You are. For a second I thought he might refuse, might push further. But something in my expression must have stopped him. Or maybe it was the realization that he no longer had control. He stepped back. This isn't over, he said. I know, I replied. But it is for me. They left without another word. The door slammed again. And then, silence. I stood there for a long moment, letting it settle. My hands were slightly cold, but they weren't shaking. My heart was steady. And beneath everything, there it was again. That feeling. Freedom. That afternoon, I made another decision. Not out of anger. Not out of escape. Out of intention. I called a travel agent. I'd like a ticket, I said. First class. To where? She asked. I paused for just a second. Then I smiled. Somewhere I've never been. By evening, it was decided. The south of France. A place I had once dreamed of visiting with my husband years ago. We had planned it, talked about it, imagined it, but life had gotten in the way. Until now. I spent the rest of the day preparing. Not frantically. Not emotionally. Carefully. Deliberately. I packed light, just what I needed. Comfortable clothes, a few things that made me feel like myself, and one small box of memories I wasn't ready to leave behind completely. The hardest part wasn't leaving the house. It was saying goodbye to Ethan. When I told him, he looked at me in silence for a long moment. You're leaving? He asked. For a while, I said. Maybe longer. He nodded slowly. Is this because of everything? It's because of me, I replied. That seemed to matter to him. Then I told him about the will. He didn't react the way Daniel had.
No anger. No excitement.
Just disbelief. Olivia, I can't accept that, he said quietly. It's too much. You can, I said. And you will. He shook his head slightly. I'm just doing my job.
No, irraplia.
You never were. He didn't argue after that. But I could see it in his eyes, the weight of it, the responsibility, the meaning. Take care of the house, I added softly. I will, he said. And take care of yourself. I finally am, I replied. The next evening, I was at the airport. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't explaining my choices. I wasn't considering how they would affect anyone else. I was simply going. As the plane lifted off, I looked out the window at the city shrinking below me. Everything I had built, everything I had endured, everything I had finally let go of. And for the first time in my life, I felt light, not because I had lost something, but because I had finally stopped carrying what was never mine to hold. I thought distance would be enough. Not to erase everything, nothing erases years, but to create space. Space to breathe, to think, to exist without constantly being pulled back into the same cycle. And for a while, it worked. The south of France felt like another world entirely. The air was softer, the light warmer, the pace of life slower in a way I had forgotten was even possible. No one knew me there. No one expected anything from me. I wasn't someone's mother, someone's obligation, someone's future inheritance. I was just Olivia. My days became simple. I walked along the coast in the mornings, stopping at small cafes where no one rushed me, where a single cup of coffee could last an hour if I wanted it to. I read books on balconies overlooking the sea, watched strangers laugh, argue, fall in love, all without feeling like I was missing something. For the first time in years, I wasn't measuring my life against anyone else's expectations. And slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time.
Peace.
Not the kind that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from finally being honest with yourself. I found a small apartment overlooking the water. Nothing extravagant, just enough. A place that felt like mine, not inherited, not shared, not negotiated.
Mine.
I bought fresh flowers every week. I cooked when I felt like it, ate out when I didn't. I spoke to strangers without explaining my past. I existed without defending my choices.
Until the day Daniel found me.
I was sitting at a cafe near the marina, halfway through a quiet lunch, when I felt it before I saw it. That shift in the air. That familiar tension. I looked up, and there he was, walking toward me with the same determined stride, the same tight expression, the same refusal to accept reality unless it bent in his direction. For a moment, I just watched him. Not with fear. Not even with anger. With clarity. He reached the table and sat down without asking.
This ends now, he said.
I took another bite of my food before responding. Hello, Daniel. Stop acting like this is normal, he snapped. You're coming home. No, I said simply.
His jaw tightened.
You don't get to just disappear. You don't get to cut me out and run away like this. I didn't run, I replied calmly. I left. There's no difference. There is, I said. One is fear. The other is choice. That only made him angrier. I've already started the process, he said, leaning closer, lowering his voice. Legal action. Medical evaluation. I have someone ready to testify that your behavior is unstable. I held his gaze. On what grounds? He laughed, a short, humorless sound. Giving away millions to a stranger? Abandoning your family? Making irrational decisions? Take your pick. I tilted my head slightly. You mean refusing to give you what you expected? His expression cracked for just a second. Then the truth slipped out. That money was supposed to be mine, he said. Dad left it to you temporarily. You were supposed to take care of it, not keep it forever. There it was. The belief he had carried for years. Not that I owned my life, but that I was holding something for him. Like a placeholder. Like a delay. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not even sadness. Understanding. You stopped seeing me as your mother a long time ago, I said quietly. You started seeing me as a timeline. That's not true, he said quickly, but there was no conviction in it. It is, I replied. And you just proved it. His hands clenched on the table. I'm not leaving without you. Yes, I said calmly. You are. A shadow fell across the table before he could respond. Is everything all right here, madam? The voice came from beside us. I looked up to see a local police officer standing there, his expression neutral but attentive. I had met him a few days earlier when registering my residency. He had given me his contact information just in case. And I had remembered. Yes, I said gently. This is my son. He seems to think he can force me to leave the country. The officer turned to Daniel. Sir, do you have identification? Daniel froze for a second, clearly not expecting this turn. This is a private matter, he said. Not if there is coercion involved, the officer replied calmly. You will need to leave if the lady requests it.
Daniel looked at me then.
Really looked. And for the first time,
he realized something.
He had no control here.
No le verí.
No power. This isn't over, he said quietly. I met his gaze. It is. He stood up slowly, hesitating for a moment, as if searching for something else to say, something that would shift things back in his favor. But there was nothing left. So he left.
Just like that.
And this time, he didn't slam the door. He didn't make a scene. He just walked away. The officer lingered for a moment. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, I said. I am. And I meant it. That evening I called Ethan. He answered immediately. Olivia? He found me, I said. There was a pause. Are you safe? Yes. I told him everything, the confrontation, the threats, the way Daniel had finally revealed what he truly believed. Ethan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, he said. You didn't deserve any of that.
No, y replía.
But I needed to see it. There was a quiet moment between us. Then I added, I've arranged something. What do you mean? I've transferred part of the inheritance to you already, I said. A starting amount. Silence. Olivia, he said finally, his voice heavier now. I don't even know what to say. Say you'll use it well. I will, he said immediately. I promise. He hesitated, then added, I've been thinking there are places that need help. People who've been forgotten. I could do something meaningful with this. I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course he could. That's why I chose him. That's exactly why it belongs to you, I said softly. After the call ended, I stepped out onto the balcony. The sea stretched endlessly in front of me, calm and steady, untouched by everything that had happened. For years, I had believed that letting go meant losing something. But standing there, I finally understood the truth. Letting go was how you take your life back. 6 months passed before I truly understood what freedom felt like. Not the dramatic kind people talk about, the sudden, overwhelming rush of change, but something quieter, steadier. Freedom, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It settles into your life slowly, like sunlight moving across a room, until one day you realize you're no longer looking over your shoulder. My life had become simple in a way that felt almost unfamiliar at first. I had routines now, not obligations, not responsibilities forced on me by others, but choices I made for myself. I woke up when I wanted, walked along the coastline without checking the time, sat in cafes where no one expected me to be anything other than present. I learned the names of people who had no idea about my past, and I liked it that way. To them, I wasn't someone with money or someone with a complicated family. I was just Olivia, a woman who enjoyed quiet mornings and long conversations. I moved permanently into a small apartment overlooking the sea. It wasn't large, it wasn't extravagant, but it was mine in a way nothing had ever been before. Every object in that space had been chosen by me, not inherited, not kept out of habit, not preserved for someone else. Fresh flowers sat on the table every morning. Books filled the shelves, not for decoration, but because I actually read them. There was a chair by the window where I spent hours simply watching the horizon, something I had never allowed myself to do before. I used to think time had to be filled to have value. Now I understood that sometimes simply existing was enough. Ethan and I spoke often. Not every day, not out of necessity, but because we wanted to. There was a difference in that kind of connection. No pressure, no expectations, no underlying transactions. Just two people choosing to stay in each other's lives. He told me about what he had started doing with the money, and every time he spoke, I felt more certain that I had made the right decision. He didn't buy a bigger house. He didn't change his lifestyle in ways that screamed success. Instead, he focused outward. He found a struggling assisted living center and invested in it, not just financially, but personally. He improved conditions, hired better staff, created spaces where people could feel seen again. He told me about residents who hadn't had visitors in years, about small changes that meant everything, gardens they could walk through, activities that gave them purpose, conversations that reminded them they still mattered. The first thing they needed wasn't money, he said during one of our calls. It was dignity. That word stayed with me.
Dignity.
It was something I had given away for years without realizing it. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left. But now I had it back. One afternoon, I received a letter. Not an email, not a message, an actual letter, handwritten, carefully folded. It was from the residents of that assisted living center. They thanked me, not directly because most of them didn't know me, but through Ethan, through what he had done with what I had given him. They wrote about the changes, about how their days had become brighter, fuller, more human. One line stayed with me longer than the rest. You reminded us that we are still worth something. I read that sentence several times.
And then I realized something.
I hadn't just changed my life. I had changed theirs. Not because I was generous, but because I had finally chosen the right person to trust. Around the same time, I heard about Daniel. Not from him, from someone back home. Things hadn't gone the way he expected. Without the inheritance he had built his life around, everything started to unravel. The house he had stretched beyond his means to afford, gone. The lifestyle he had maintained through assumptions rather than reality, gone. He and Claire had moved in with her parents. I tried to feel something when I heard that.
Guilt.
Regret. Sadness. But what I felt instead was distance. Not indifference. Not cruelty. Just the quiet understanding that his life was no longer mine to carry. A few days later, my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at the screen longer than I expected. For a moment, I considered not answering. It would have been easier, cleaner. But something told me I needed to hear what he had to say, not for him, but for myself. So I answered. Hello. There was a pause before he spoke. His voice was different. Not the sharp, demanding tone I had known for years.
Softer.
Smaller. I wanted to apologize, he said. I didn't respond right away. I've had time to think, he continued, about everything. The way I treated you. The things I said. Still, I said nothing. I was wrong, he added. There it was. The words I had waited years to hear. And yet, they didn't feel the way I thought they would. Because they came too late. Are you calling because you've changed? I asked quietly. Or because your situation has? Silence. That was my answer. I don't have anything left, he admitted finally. And there it was. Not remorse. Not understanding. Need. I see, I said. I was hoping maybe we could start over, he added. Be a real family again. I looked out at the sea as he spoke. The waves moved the same way they always did, steady, indifferent, honest. Daniel, I said slowly, we were never a real family. We were a pattern. One that I allowed for far too long. That's not fair, he said, but his voice lacked strength.
No, y replía.
Fair would have been having a son who cared about me when I had nothing to give. He didn't answer. The money is gone, I continued. And even if it wasn't, I wouldn't give you another dollar. Another silence. Then, quietly, so that's it? Yes, I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it completely. I ended the call before he could say anything else. Not out of anger, out of closure. That evening, I went to my favorite restaurant. The staff greeted me by name, the table by the window was waiting, and the sky outside was painted in colors no photograph could ever capture properly. I ordered a glass of wine and sat there, watching the sun disappear slowly into the horizon. A year ago, I would have felt lonely in that moment. Now, I felt whole, because I finally understood the difference. Being alone is not the same as being unloved, and being surrounded by people does not mean you're valued. I had spent years holding on to something that looked like family, but felt like obligation. Now I had something else.
Choice. Peace.
And people in my life who stayed, not because they expected something from me, but because they wanted to be there. Ethan was coming to visit soon. He said he wanted to see the place I had built, to walk along the coast, to sit and talk without time limits or expectations. I smiled when I thought about it, not because I needed him, but because I chose him. And that made all the difference. As I walked home that night, the air warm and quiet around me, I realized something I wished I had understood much earlier. It's never too late to choose yourself. Not out of selfishness, but out of respect for the life you've been given. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance you can leave behind isn't money. It's the courage to stop giving your life to the wrong people. And finally, start living it for yourself.